Welcome back to Helicopter Lessons in 10 Minutes or Less. I'm Jacob, and this video is not so much a video, but a podcast interview. I was recently contacted by Mick Cullen of the Rotary Wing Show, who interviews pilots from around the world following different helicopter career paths, as well as sharing some of the tricks of the trade and the backstories from some of these air crews. In our interview, we talk about civilian hiring practices, general entry into the Army flight training program, and what it's like to be a military pilot, specifically a instructor pilot. There's also some discussion on pitfalls and knowledge of new pilots, and where studying can be focused to help these new aviators grow. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, as well as check out the Rotary Wing Show podcast. I'll put links in the description. Without further delay, here's the interview.
You're listening to the Rotary Wing Show, a show for helicopter aircrew by helicopter aircrew. Each episode, we travel the world to hear from the people that fly and support helicopters, to learn a little bit more about their stories and pick up some tips along the way. If you want to catch up on past shows or see photos from the interviews, head over to rotarywingshow.com. You can also subscribe on iTunes. Just search for Rotary Wing Show and get future episodes direct to your phone. I'm your host, Mick Cullen. This is episode 102. G'day. I conducted a number of interviews for pilot positions when I was heading up the flying school at my past job. To try and keep everything fair and repeatable, I had the same list of questions to take all the applicants through. There was the normal behavioural style interview questions you'd expect in any job, and then there were the aviation professional knowledge questions depending on the role we were hiring for. It surprised me, but those professional knowledge questions really split the field and made applicants stand out, either for good or for bad. People are getting through flight school or have been out on the job flying for a little bit and are just paying off or ignoring the study that got them the license in the first place. The first question that would trip up people would be VFR alternate weather requirements. Some people would mix up some of the numbers from VMC criteria with those of alternate minimas. And then there was some confusion at times between alternate minimas where you are able to use helicopter VMC at the destination and times when you couldn't, for example, in controlled airspace. And I get it. I know interviews are pretty stressful and artificial. Normally, if you weren't sure of the answer or the number during pre-flight planning, you could just look it up if you had to. But that is a pretty fair question for a job interview, and you want to be able to nail it and similar airlaw questions because it's going to elevate you above the pack if others aren't putting in the study to keep on top of the regs. Another one that surprised me was the ability or lack of it for pilot job applicants to be able to draw and label a basic rotor vector diagram on a blank sheet of paper or on a whiteboard. For some pilots, that looked like something that they just hadn't done or looked at in a while, and they couldn't do it or could only get parts of it out. Again, I think being able to draw a vector diagram is a pretty low bar for commercial pilots to be able to spit out without too much thought for a job interview scenario. But again, asking people to do that really helped to split the pack. And it's tough as an interviewer. You've got to make a decision in sometimes less than 60 minutes with someone whether they can do the job and where they sit in comparison against other applicants. It can come down to just a few questions like those. So let's do a little bit of introspection here. If you're listening to this and the thought of walking up to a blank whiteboard and drawing a basic vector diagram, then using that to explain dissymmetry of lift, ground effect, and auto rotation, if that makes you sweat and feel a bit uncomfortable, then that's great. We've found an easy spot where you can put a bit of effort in and get yourself back up to a professional standard. It shouldn't matter if you are a commercial pilot or a private pilot. That professional standard and pride is something that we should hold ourselves to and each other to. We owe it to our families and the people that trust us to fly them around. And if you have to do it in your next job interview and you pull it off flawlessly and confidently, send me a check in the mail. To turn you into a aerodynamics guru in the shortest amount of time, probably the best resource I can point you to is the YouTube channel Helicopter Lessons in 10 Minutes or Less. To chat about the history of the channel and what goes into making the videos, we've got the creator, Jacob, joining us today. Jacob is an Apache instructor and standards officer. After a bit of a hiatus out doing what Apache pilots do, Jacob is back online and has started releasing some new videos and several more topics in the queue. Jacob, thanks very much for having a chat. It's been a while. I think we first reached out ages ago, but you've had a lot of stuff on since. So it's great to see you back. You've got a video that's gone up possibly by the time this goes to air about 2 weeks ago. And at the time I'm looking at the moment, it's about 70 comments or so welcoming you back to your videos. So it's it's good to have you back around.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, we're going to chat about a whole bunch of stuff, but most folks for helicopters, where did it all start for you?
I think it's just kind of been in the family, honestly. I grew up and my dad was actually a flight medic, so I remember going out as a kid and seeing him at like Air National Guard displays, showing capabilities of helicopters. And back then, that was the old Huey days. I remember watching, the medevac helicopter, the Hueys coming up right over treetop level, hoisting down a litter, as my dad as a medic, going down, picking up a patient for this, family display, watching them come out of the helicopter, pick up the patient, hoist back up into the helicopter, and then just go right back to skimming above the treetops. And I just thought that was just one of the coolest things growing up. And that really kind of planted the seed of that, or in my mind, that helicopters and flying helicopters was what I want to do growing up. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I saw the different types of helicopters, between Marine and Air Force and Army, and really kind of honed in on the Apache. I figured that was going to be one of the coolest airframes out there, and ended up selecting that.
And how did they structure the family days back then? Like, did you get to go for rides then as a kid?
Not as a kid, no. I remember. I mean, this was just an air guard, so it's kind of like soldiers who do this part time but can be activated to full time. But they'd have days where you could just go out with the families to kind of demonstrate the capabilities. I don't remember going to them all the time, but I remember that one sticks out in my head as just kind of planting the seed of really seeing helicopters and what they could do. Just completely blew my mind. Just thought it was the coolest thing growing up, seeing that. Especially, it was seeing my dad getting hoisted out of it, picking up somebody and getting hoisted back in.
My kids are very blasé. They've grown up visiting the aircraft and the hangars and all that sort of stuff. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just a normal job. So
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
totally over it. But I can
Oh yeah,
imagine.
mine like looking up and I mean they can tell you it's a helicopter, but that's about it.
And so, out of school, did you have that as a plan? So
Yeah, so when I got older, I started talking to my dad, asking him, what I need to do to what did I need to be able to do first before I go in and fly. And he said to go talk to some of the buddies that he used to fly with, and they all convinced me, with a little bit of his nudging, hey, get your degree first. So I got my college degree first, and then I went straight to the recruiter's desk, and I just told him, hey, I want to fly Apaches. He immediately just kind of laughed in my face and handed me a practice ASVAB and said, here you go, kiddo, take this. So ended up doing well on the practice ASVAB, which is the entrance exam for the military. Really just kind of lumps you into different, I guess, groups of where your scores are, what you're good at, what you're weak at. But from there, just kind of going through the testing and kind of pushing towards, getting that packet. The recruiter really didn't know a whole lot about the process. So I'm on the internet looking it up. Hey, it says I need to do this. Hey, can you schedule me for this? Can you schedule me for this? I need a flight physical. I need to take the this test. I need to go do this. And he's just like, "Well, okay," and kind of let me, I guess, dictate the process, or at least what I was coming across online as far as what needed to be done next. And went through all the hurdles and took probably about 7 to 8 months from walking into a recruiter station until I was reporting into basic training.
what did you do at college? What was your degree?
I've got a bachelor's in business and a master's in business.
All right, so
Kind of fell into the master's. Wasn't planning on that one, but it was one of those too good of an opportunities to pass up situations. So I kind of hung around there and got that knocked out, and then went to go put in my packet.
cool. Okay, because I wasn't sure if that was going to lead in whether you'd done engineering or aero eng or something like that at college.
No, surprisingly, I thought about the engineering course, but really, and I asked my dad a lot. I get a lot of respect for my dad and everything that he's done in his life. But I was telling him, hey, I really just want to fly helicopters, but I need a degree, or I got to get a degree. What I thought in the process, I later found out you don't necessarily need a degree to do it. But he's just saying, hey, you can't go wrong with a business degree. It'll get you well rounded. You'll have a little bit of everything, and if you decide the Army's not for you, you can get out and get a job anywhere. So it's just like, okay, that sounds good. Go ahead and get the business degree, and then get that under my belt and move forward.
And in flight training, did you always know you're going to go to Apache, or did you have to wait till the end of the course to get a type selection?
So how it works is it's an order of merit list. So it's you're competing with everybody else in your class, which flight school starts every 2 weeks, and you're kind of lumped in that batch of people. And you go through the flight school process, which is just a series of schools, I guess, flowing consecutively, tested along the way, and then you get to an aircraft selection where basically they come in the room and they say, all right, this is the needs of the Army. We have, this many Black Hawk, this many Apache, this many Kiowa, this many Chinook. Number one in the class, go take your pick. He takes his pick. Number two, you go take your pick. And they're marking them off the board. So whatever's left over at the bottom of the class, that's what you're stuck with. So if you want to get the aircraft that you want, you score highly in the class. So people are some people knew what they wanted. Some people didn't know what they wanted. I, from the start, just like, I want Apaches from the start. Everybody knew it. You had a few diehards, and then you had a few that were kind of leaning towards one airframe, and then a few that just they were just happy with whatever they got.
And I think it was Jason Mills ages back. He essentially turned up at his unit, and they were in Iraq at the time, and did a lot of his training like in theatre. Is it kind of structured that way? You get sent to a unit and do your training on type then, or do you do your type training on Apache first before you get to a unit? How's it structured on the Apache training?
So when I went through, everybody flew the TH-67, which is the Bell Jet Ranger. Everybody flew that until aircraft selection. So everybody, went to the basic takeoffs, landings, instruments, stuff like that. Everybody started with that TH-67, got to the aircraft selection phase. From there, they selected their aircraft, and then they moved on and started progressing in that aircraft while still in flight school. So, you got to the Black Hawk, the Chinook, the Apache. But then from there, then you got your orders to your first duty station. And then at the duty station, that was kind of like the on-the-job, you've learned how to drive the car in a parking lot. Now we're going to show you how we drive it here at the unit type mindset. So it goes from like, the very, very, very basics of flight school to now you show up to the unit and you're still like, you're qualified to fly, but you're still with an instructor for those first few months.
And I can't remember. It's the back seat in the Apache is the pilot.
Either crew member can fly, and either crew member can operate the weapon systems. However, the front seat is more tailored towards weapon systems. It's more accurate. The back seat is better suited for flying. It's better rigged for flying, but it's meant to be operated independently in either crew station.
So the aircraft captain could be in the front or the back. Like it just
right.
It doesn't go with the pilot or the gunnery role. That's just independent of that.
That's correct. And depending on what I'm instructing at the time, I may be in either seat, depending on what I need to instruct or evaluate the other crew member doing.
Okay.
I could be evaluating on weapon systems, and so I'll want them in the front seat, or purely on piloting capability, I may put them in the back seat. But yeah, either seat you can do flying or weaponry.
And within that community, do people specialize in one or the other, or you purposely, like, everyone just cross trains on everything, or do you have people who specialize a little bit?
So unlike the other airframes, I guess a lot of the, Black Hawk, Chinook, and really a lot of helicopters that are not gunship based, everybody pretty much has the same job. Well, in the Apache, it's a different job in the front seat than it is the back seat. The front seat is, once again, very, very sights and weapons oriented. It's meant to look out, find, and engage, whereas the back seat is purely meant to fly, navigate, and communicate. So it's two purely different jobs, but we do train on both so that you can put pilots in either seat to be able to operate, depending on what the mission is.
I'm just thinking of the checks we used to have to do, like every 3 months would be like a unaided night, MDG, IF, all the different sort of sequences you would do. I'm just imagining the training program for you guys. It must just be back-to-back checks all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty busy. I guess without going into too many specifics, in the Army, all aviators have to do an annual exam that pretty much covers all the bases. You have to do all the tasks, and you're evaluated on academic knowledge as well. So that can get pretty can get pretty busy.
For sure. Okay, let's jump to your YouTube channel.
Okay.
So for folks who aren't aware, it's obviously helicopter lessons in 10 minutes. And just looking at the timestamps on the videos, it looks like you put your first one up maybe just over about 3 years ago. Were you already an instructor at that point, or this was something you're doing to kind of help study? What was the original sort of setup to do it?
So up to that point, I guess when I created the first video, I was going through the instructor pilot course, learning to become an instructor and an evaluator. Kind of up to that point, you start out your unit as just a line company pilot, where you're not a pilot in command. You have to fly with another pilot in command, somebody who's kind of gone through those rigmaroles and trials and tribulations, whatever, to become a pilot in command. So first unit showed up as just a baseline pilot, kind of worked up to a pilot in command, and then I was moving to my next duty station while taking the instructor pilot course en route. So that first, I want to say 4 to 5 videos or so, I was going through the instructor pilot course, and I made them as basically almost like study slides. Before I went to the instructor pilot course, I had this huge 3-inch binder of like what I was telling you about, everything that you have to have on your annual exam. Well, I just started building this 3-inch binder of everything that could possibly be asked of me. And over the course of doing that, going over topics like ETL, well, I can, do a 1-page on explaining effective translational lift or transverse flow or all the aerodynamics, all the regulations, all the weaponeering, all the aeromedical factors, everything. I'd just been building this big 3-inch binder. So I just figured, so many people, I guess, that I'd gone or I guess been with in units, asking questions and clarification questions. I was just like, you know what, I could just make videos of this stuff. Enough people ask, it could at least float around maybe the military community and kind of answer some of those questions. Not to mention it's something I could build that stays longer than I, possibly would in the Army. It could help out, future generations of pilots. So I just started going over videos over really the stuff that I'd been working on the last few years and just kind of kept to myself in this little 3-inch binder.
On an instructor course, normally you do, like anything, you do everything the hard way first. So you're using a whiteboard or a chalkboard or whatever it is to draw these up. When people are going through training, or if you're giving lessons now, obviously you've got these videos to send people to, but in the current system there in the US Army, is it you're still delivering aerodynamics lessons on whiteboards, or delivering them PowerPoint? How's it actually happening in the training system? What
So the Army loves PowerPoint, but I think the average soldier absolutely hates it, and we try to stay away from it. So a lot of the stuff, if I've got a new batch of aviators that just showed up to the unit, I'll just say, hey, we're going to go fly and we're going to do some basic takeoffs and landings today. But before you show up, I want you to talk about some basic aerodynamics. I want you to explain ETL. I want you to explain transverse flow. I want you to explain dissymmetry of lift. And then before we fly, I want each one of you guys to just teach a quick class, make sure you have an understanding, and then we'll go and fly it. And for aerodynamics, that's, maybe 5% of the job. Maybe the first few classes we'll talk aerodynamics, then we'll talk airspace and regulations. We'll talk about train flight techniques. We'll talk about night vision characteristics. We'll talk about, all the different subject areas that, is required to teach and evaluate. But yeah, preferably just a 1-page, or, talk to me about it at the aircraft or on a whiteboard. Just show me that you have comprehension of these subjects before we get in the aircraft. Because once you get in the aircraft as a new student, really, you're just hanging on. If you don't understand it, you're just, you're thinking about the next maneuver. You're thinking about, what am I going to do with flight controls? What am I going to do when I turn base to final and all this kind of stuff? And then if you ask somebody a question in flight, if their brains, the little hamster's already running 1,000,000 miles an hour, they're not going to be able to answer a question in flight. But at the table before we go fly, like, do they have an understanding of this before we fly? That's really what I'm trying to get at.
I think, especially the aerody, if you're on a whiteboard, you can launch from one aspect into the next, because you obviously start with, vector diagramming. You end up, transferring how that then works in autos or, ground effect. So it's one of those things where you can just move from one topic, and it's like a never-ending chain where you just keep chaining it up with the next thing that happens. And
right.
Yeah, and I must admit that when I was teaching like straight aerodynamics course, so sometimes honestly I'd pull out one of your videos because it's like, okay, I can sit here and draw this up, or here's this really good video that someone's done, and you can get the whole concept in 8 minutes, and your writing is going to be a lot neater than what I can put on the whiteboard. So that's where I came across it, and essentially, yeah, like all our guys going through for especially for aerody, that was just a fantastic resource for us. And so There's one flight school in Australia leaning on some of your stuff. What sort of commentary have you had back? Like, who do you hear from, and how far? What's the weirdest sort of places you've found your videos being watched, and the feedback you've got?
YouTube analytics shows a lot of information on it, but I want to say it's somewhere in the ballpark of 50 to 60 countries that the videos go out to, predominantly the US, UK, Australia. I want to say India, and then some parts of Asia are kind of like the big five that it gets. But I'd say the lion's share of the views come from the United States, and a lot of people really just asking about, the whole process of becoming an Army aviator, which is why I put out that video of becoming an Army aviator that just kind of outlines the process. And then people started asking about, well, how do you get in? How do you pass the SIF test? So then I, put in those videos. But I get a lot of people asking really how to join the Army, how to be a pilot. And then I think I get a fair share of people who are, in flight school who are like, hey, man, this got me through primary. This got me through, the basics. This took the dry writings of all the manuals and it put it into like a usable form that made sense instead of just reading textbook of, this concept or this concept. Like, I guess breaking it down to Barney style is what some people have said.
Yeah.
Like elementary style.
And you see these, professional YouTubers out there with pretty fancy kind of studio setups. How'd you rig up your camera? Because like it's they're clean, simple videos. But how'd you structure it? How'd you sort of get the video there and all the camera in the right place? And what are you using? Are you using a smartphone? How'd you set it up?
So it was pretty funny when I was in the instructor pilot course when I first started those videos. I was actually sitting at the Holiday Inn on post at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where flight school, does everything aviation. Everybody knows that's where aviation is. But I'm sitting there in the hotel, kind of get this idea that I want to record videos and just decide to go for it. Didn't really have a mount, didn't have anything. I was living out of a suitcase because my household was packed up to go be sent to my next location. So I'm just kind of looking around at what I have. Ended up getting about 3 coat hangers out of the closet, a few books, and making this weird contraption that kind of balances my phone above the writing desk. And I've got the light on, and I pull another lamp over on the edge of the desk. And from just a very basic setup, just start filming from my phone. So that first video is very, very rough. And just like everybody else who starts YouTube, their first few videos are just they're going to be rough. But it is what it is. But recorded that, kind of figured out how to crop and edit and make video flow, from frame to frame to frame. Add some music, check the audio, until we're now living in my house. Now I've got a phone mount. I'm still using an iPhone. I've used an iPhone to record every video up to this point, but I'll record it on my iPhone using a mount and a few different lightings or lights around it. Usually airdrop it over to my iPad, do all the editing on the Splice app or iMovie, depending on what I'm feeling that day, and then just straight into YouTube. So it's I'd probably say the channel itself has cost less than maybe $150 or $200 to put up, mainly because the only thing I've really gotten for it is just a stand to hold my phone and then a little bit of lights.
I'm picturing, like, if I had to do this, I would have the desk, and then out of picture on the floor would be all the crumpled up pieces of paper where I've stuffed something up. So how do you prep for it? Do you have a whiteboard and you sort of plan out how it's going to look at the end and then reverse engineer it? What's your process for sitting down and actually ending up with when you get the blank piece of paper and the pen in your hand?
Yeah, so I take a lot of viewer feedback. I get a lot of people asking for videos, and I just keep a running log, just a notebook of all the things that people are talking about. So, like, I've got 3 videos in the works right now, just from viewer feedback that they'll come up with an idea. I'll research it, cross-reference it against a bunch of manuals because I like to check Army manuals, Navy manuals, civilian manuals, and really just kind of anything else on the internet that may be out there that may have some sort of validity. Kind of go trekking through all the woods, see what's important, see what's not, kind of grab all the things that are important, bring it back into my notebook, and just kind of organize my thoughts. And So I'll have a spiral binder, and I'll just kind of write all my thoughts out in a way that flows, kind of roughly draw a diagram of what I want it to be. And if I do some dry runs on it and it's more than 10 minutes, I know I got to go and cut back some of it. So I'll go and cut down because I really want to preserve the conciseness of less than 10 minutes. Because, if you get too long winded on a lot of these subjects, people just start to lose interest. You really lose sight of, what's important, what's not important. So I'll just sit there and do a few dry runs, some notes in my notebooks, a few different sketches to see kind of what works out. And I want to work up to, I guess, pushing out more videos. But currently, it takes me anywhere from 6 to 10 hours to make a 10-minute video.
Yep.
From maybe an hour to 2 hours of research, an hour of just prepping, drawing, organizing notes. The actual filming, it sometimes takes one or two takes, but just about all my videos are single, just straight through. I try to just draw it without having a whole lot of cropping and clips spliced together or anything like that. I'll try to go straight through. But then from there, the video editing, adding some sort of like promo in the beginning, adding music, uploading it, and then all the descriptions. I try to put copious amounts of notes because a lot of people, if they have questions, they'll just go straight down into the notes, and they can see for the most part, a lot of my stuff has a text below the video that kind of goes into the details if they missed it from the clip itself.
I had a note here to to give you a poke about. You're doing the wonderful Army introduction motivational part where you've got a couple of seconds of Apache video flying. Oh, sorry, Apache flying around as the normal typical template for Army training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no shortage of, I guess, cool photos and videos and just really scenery that I come across. It's just like if you drew, I don't know, drove just, an awesome car and some awesome scenery all the time, like you would just naturally collect that type of footage. So I try to put just, a teaser at the beginning, just kind of shows, if sometimes it applies to the video, sometimes it's just something cool to look at, but, something that makes it not just dry pen and paper, but some sort of application video.
Have you found that when you go for your own instructor renewals, do you get they go a bit easy on you and for the aerodynamic side?
Um, yeah, I guess so. At this point now, I'm so I guess some of the qualifications I went through the instructor pilot course. I went to the instrument examiner course, which is like the military equivalent of a CFII. Went through a few other courses and then got to I got signed off as a standardization pilot. So now I have the ability to train and evaluate other instructors. So now a lot of my evals are my ability to develop another instructor. So I will evaluate them training somebody else from scratch or evaluating somebody else. So, the shortfalls of them as an instructor, and then usually I'll take them out on a flight and I'll just play stupid and I'll just say, hey, role reversal. I'm a 200-hour pilot and we're going to go fly and do this. And then, I'll just start messing up stuff or forgetting stuff to see, do they spot check? Do they see what is missed? What is wrong? Things like that. But on my evals, and now as a standardization pilot, it's one of those like where it's this big circle of somebody wants to see me evaluate an instructor evaluating a student. And how do I give feedback to that instructor? And it's really another standardization pilot. It's just kind of like the quality control on me.
Now, how do you do that in Apache with two seats? So are they playing the instructor who's a student? Like it starts to get pretty complicated depending how many hats you're wearing at the same time. Or are you actually flying with an instructor that you are evaluating and they're watching or they're assessing some other way?
Right. So it's, I guess what I was saying earlier about the annual evaluation. So say there's an evaluation that comes up, it'll be just a room with say the pilot to be evaluated, the instructor, me as the standardization pilot. So, three people if I'm evaluating somebody, or if I'm getting evaluated, then maybe another person evaluating me in the process. And each person in that room is getting evaluated to some extent on different levels and for different, I guess, capabilities. But then when it comes time to the flight portion, me as a standardization pilot with another standardization pilot, we're going to go out there and we're going to go, and he won't, he's going to say like, okay, how do you teach a new instructor how to teach these maneuvers? Let's say you have a new instructor who, he's right out of the schoolhouse. He's, a brand new Army instructor pilot. How are you going to go show him to demonstrate these maneuvers to new pilots in this area? And so it's kind of, I guess, one of those dynamics. Or what instructors love to do is just role reversal. At any point he could say, hey, role reversal, I am a 150-hour aviator, I'm a 400-hour aviator. I've been struggling with this. I want to work on this because I'm always struggling on this. And he just wants to see my ability to, perform as either instructor pilot or standardization pilot or so on and so forth. They could switch hats, but I guess the further up the pecking order you go, the more you can kind of get picked on for, what you got to know and what you got to be able to instruct and evaluate.
So what you're saying is for the 150-hour pilot out there, that the study and the preparation just never stops. It's just continuous.
Yeah, it's a lifelong learning experience, that's for sure. Because at each level, you're expected to know more and more. Yeah, so it's never ending. Always got to be in the books.
All right, let's use that as a segue then. So you've basically come up with a book, or you converted some of those slides into a book. How'd that process work? Again, I can see it and I'll link to it on iTunes there, but it doesn't go into what's inside the book. But yeah, what was the process there? And when you open up the book, what are you looking at? Is it separate, like different to the YouTube videos, or are they incorporated? How does that work?
Slightly different, but incorporated, I guess, is the short answer. So I've got a lot of people who they're really looking for just a quick something that can flip through on their phone, maybe study, refresh before an exam. That just cuts it down. And basically, I took those first 20, I think it's like 24, 25 videos, something like that, and I put it just on a one-page, pretty much PowerPoint or PDF. Just a cleaned up graphics, cleaned up definition. Just a one page. This is everything you need to know if you need it. If you get asked about it, into a PDF book. It's on iBooks and Kobo. So depending on what software, desktop, Apple software, whatever. But it was meant to be just an even shorter version of what those first few videos were. So if you're sitting around there, you're about to have a check ride or something like that, you could sit there on your phone and flip through all these, review. All right, I got that. Flip to the next slide. Okay, yeah, I remember that. Flip to the next slide. And then now that I'm building more and more videos, I'll probably put a second book out there eventually that captures, the second set. But it's just more of a condensed study guide of those videos.
Okay, and I guess the process of creating these videos, the feedback you get, and then flying with pilots across a whole range, if you had to pick like three, and I guess we're focusing on aerody rather than going too far other knowledge components, but is there, in the general pilot population, is there a couple of spots where you're finding, that generally we're pretty weak on those areas and that basic aerody?
I'd say a lot of pilots right out of flight school, they know how to fly the helicopter roundabouts. It's like a driving school where you know how to drive, say, in a parking lot, and then you get into the real world and you're going to encounter circumstances that are not quite like the parking lot that you learned to drive in initially. And there's going to be a little bit of a gap in knowledge that you have to bridge, because you may or may not know the reference or be able to recall the reference when you learned. I guess how that flows an example is coming out of flight school, people may know, dissymmetry of lift, and they know, okay, the advancing side creates more than the retreating side. Okay, well, what does that mean? I don't know. You'll get questions like they can regurgitate what the book says, but they don't necessarily have an application. But then you take them out to the traffic pattern. You say, hey, as I'm taking off, you'll notice this, 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 and this. I'm doing this with the flight controls. Like that's what you're seeing when you're seeing this aerodynamic concept. When I'm thinking translating tendency or transverse flow, like this is how it manifests in the helicopter. If I go out here and I'm flying at treetop level and you say this happens, what do you think just happened? The nose just went to the right and it, didn't seem to stop on its own. Oh, that might have been lost tail rotor effectiveness. You studied it, but here's a real world application, bridging that knowledge. So what I'm seeing with people out of flight school is they have that rote memory or just the regurgitation of, they know what the textbook says, but they don't necessarily know what that looks like in the aircraft. Sometimes even when it happens, they don't know. I've had multiple pilots, especially loss of tail rotor effectiveness. They experience it and they have no idea why. They just know that the aircraft's turning and it's not stopping. And it's not till afterwards we get to the table we talk about it. Hey, what are the factors that go into that? What kind of flight profile were you in? Where were the winds? How much power are you pulling?
Yeah, it's tricky because you think of the normal training program, it's pretty packed tight as it is. And often you just don't have the context to join some of the things together. So it's probably just a part of that learning process, whatever field it is, I guess all the instructor stuff, it transfers from, the knowledge to understanding. So yeah, I'm not sure how to tackle that one. It's just, I guess, part of the learning process.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know other than just like what you said. It's very condensed as far as the pilot training. Army is no different than the civilian world. It's all like how much can you get per flight hour, and really until you start bridging the gaps between the book knowledge and the aircraft, it's just going to be there until that understanding is developed.
If we cast a little bit of a wider net there, Jacob, is there again a couple of top things looking back? What were the things you'd love to have learnt when you were 200 hours or 400 hours that are the things you kind of just starting to develop that understanding for now?
That's a tough one because you don't ever really know what you don't know until you don't know it, or until you realize you don't know it. Um, I'd say really just having a thorough understanding of what those aerodynamic principles before you get into it. I've been in a few aircraft. Sometimes I was the pilot on the controls, sometimes I wasn't, but there's been over torques or there's been striking a tree or the little things that happen, failures of equipment in flight that you have the base understanding, but you really don't ever think about what happens if that were to ever happen to you. I guess for me, looking back, I would try to analyze why are emergency procedures the way they are. Why are they written the way they are? Because if you understand the systems, if they were to fail you, you understand why the emergency procedure is the way it is. Or when you have aerodynamic phenomena or whatever that happen, and you understand the recovery, if you understand why the recovery is the way it is, kind of builds that base of knowledge. So kind of getting into those situations before, or I guess understanding those a little bit better, is something I wish I would have spent a little bit more time on. I think I just, as a new pilot, everybody just thinks it's cool, and you're drinking from a fire hose, just trying to take everything in, but you're not necessarily digesting, understanding why things are the way they are. But then you find yourself in a situation that could be scary or life threatening, and you get through it based on muscle memory. Hopefully, everything goes well, and you get back and you're like, oh man, that's why the emergency procedure says this. Like, okay, I understand now because that just now directly happened to me. I'm never going to let myself get in that situation again. I'm going to understand this a little bit more. Thankfully, I got out of that one unscathed. I don't
I
know if that
guess
answers your
there's a bit
question or not.
more. Yeah, I was going to say there's a bit more context there too, given the nature of operations of what Apaches are doing, rather than someone who's listening who's flying tours. It's a completely different situation hitting a tree in a normal sort of civilian flight regime.
Yeah, I mean, I think the longer you fly, the more you're going to have instances that just happen. I've had quite a bit of mechanical failures of different systems. Night vision failures. I've had some of the systems on the Apache I can't really get into, but I've had all kinds of failures in those systems. I've had a tree strike before. Been shot at, uh, things like that. You better understand what's going on. So when stuff fails, you know how to react, and you know how to react the proper way. Because based on the parameter you're in, airspeed, altitude, hostility situation, you may or may not be able to react in time or do the right action. Like that could mean life or death in the helicopter.
Absolutely. What's you said that the last lot of videos you got up is a SIFT. So what does that stand for again?
So that's the selection instrument for flight testing. It's the new standard for what the Army tests for to become an aviator. So entering into the Army, you have the ASVAB. It's a battery of tests. It's really generic, sees what you're good at, what you're bad at. But if you want to go aviation, in addition to that test, you're going to have to pass the SIF test. which is what those videos go over. Just kind of a outline of all the modules of the test.
Okay, and then without giving too much away, what's the next one or two videos you got in the works there?
Let's see. I've got a one on mushing, which is really an Army term. I don't think I've found it much in
No, I've
other
got no,
manuals, but
I've got no idea what it is.
so mushing is it's a temporary stall condition that happens in a dive recovery, an aggressive dive recovery, which not a whole lot of civilian helicopters that I know of can experience too many profiles where they're in extreme dive and have to recover rapidly. Depending on what you're doing, some crop dusters could find themselves in dive recoveries depending on what kind of maneuvers they're going, spraying fields and whatnot. But it's a temporary stall condition after recovering from a dive that basically the aircraft doesn't want to recover but wants to continue towards the earth. So I'll kind of outline why that happens and how to avoid it, and if you experience it, how to get out of it so that you don't just have a controlled flight into the ground, because there's nothing mechanically wrong with the helicopter. It's just an aerodynamic situation that you have to understand if you're doing a lot of diving. Also have a video that goes over confined area landings. So if either military or civilian, whatever you're doing, there's all kinds of situations where you have to land field that may be just big enough for the helicopter. So I'll outline some of the ways that both the military acronyms, some of the things that they use, as well as some of the FAA acronyms, what they use for clearing themselves into landing zones, and some general techniques and what to look for.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think I've subscribed to the channel, so I'll see those when they come out. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Jacob, that's awesome, mate. Thank you so much for the time. And as I said, it's always interesting if people are watching the videos online to hear a bit about the background, what happens behind it. And if you are, leave a comment on Jacob's videos there, especially if you're after particular topics that he hasn't covered already. I see that you're taking feedback on and that sort of interest of what people want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of live and breathe off of what do people want to see. I add that to the notebook, and I just start once I get enough notes, and kind of if people are hitting the same topics over and over, I'm just like, all right, these people, they really want to see this, and so I'll start pushing to get a video out. So yeah, and I get some pretty wild stuff that I've never even heard of, and I have to go to some obscure manual to even find some sort of reference for it. So if it applies to the masses, I try to put those videos out first, and then I'll chase the little intricate things as I go.
Okay, so the YouTube channel, it's helicopter lessons in 10 minutes or less. What's the easiest way to get to the book?
So all the videos, they should have a link to the book in the description. If you just open up the description below, and then in the about section of YouTube, it's got an email address. So if you have any issues, you can go to that email address, or questions, you can go to there. I'm usually best about responding through YouTube. I'm a little bit slow on the email, so if you really need to get a hold of me, just leave a comment on one of the videos. But yeah, if you have any issues with any of your books, just check that link, and its email address is just 10minutehelicopter@gmail.com.
Yeah, thanks. I found them super useful just for for my own refresher and making sure I've got a concept down. And as I said when I was instructing, we're definitely use them for students here too in Australia, so that they get around. And yeah, thanks for your hard work.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great.